Welcome back to Motorsports Today. As the NASCAR season gets closer and closer, we're just 2 weeks out from the clash at Bowman Gray Stadium to kick off 2025. And with that, NASCAR has announced a host of new rule changes heading into the 2025 season. And to get a little bit more insight on that, happy to be joined by the content director for Frontstretch, Stephen Stumpf. Stephen, thanks for joining the program.
Hey, happy to be here. And man, off season went by in a flash. Only what is it? 3 weeks till Bowman Gray, which is gonna be fun in its own right. So I'm ready for 2025 to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. The offseason's flown by, and kind of out of nowhere, NASCAR dropped a whole bunch of rule changes heading into the 2025 season. Certainly, a lot of opinions have been shared on several of them, and maybe the biggest one of all that continues to evolve is this special entry for Elio Castroneves into the Daytona 500. So the Project 91 program is back for Elio at first to make an attempt, but now it appears that he is guaranteed a spot in the race because of this new legacy car that gets a provisional. Could you tell us a little more about that and what your thoughts are?
So basically, the gist of the rule is that there's drivers that it's kind of like your local short track, and it's like the promoter's choice, and basically certain drivers from other backgrounds can basically apply 90 days before the actual race, and they could fall under this new category, like for example, in exactly what Helio Castroneves would be doing. And basically, what it entails is that if he doesn't qualify for the Daytona 500 through the regular means of either speed and qualifying or finishing high enough in the duels, he will be automatically guaranteed entry as a 41st car above the current maximum of 40. On the other hand, though, if he does make it on speed or if he does race his way in, then it will just be 40 cars as normal. The 41st car will go away. So my thoughts on it, obviously it's a very mixed bag. I can see both sides of the coin here because Helio is such a big name. It would be such a great promotion to have him in the race, not just attempting, but to make the race as well. And NASCAR has been hats off to Trackhouse because Project 91, they've been trying to get as many different drivers from other backgrounds here, and I think it's a great thing for the sport to have. But at the same time, I can also see the other side where the teams are like, hey, why do they get special treatment? They're trying to just make it in just like everyone else. So I guess my ultimate thoughts on it are I think it would be much better to have Helio Castroneves in the 500 than not in it. So my hope is that he manages to race his way in and this 41st car doesn't even come to fruition.
Yeah, it becomes really awkward with the new reporting from Bob Pockrass that just came out about whether there's qualifying or duels. If Elio Castroneves, say, secures a spot through qualifying or the duels, then there will only be 40 cars, but they will add the 41st if he does not qualify his way in through the duels, but then becomes a little messy with some of the other open cars. But I mean, I think this is going to be something that we see beyond the Daytona 500. And I also think it'll be interesting to see with these applications what NASCAR considers a world-class driver and what they don't.
Yes. And something I'll also add here is that this may not in other Project 91 races that they decide to do throughout the season. This may not even be a problem because there's only last year there's only there are 5 races that had the full 40 car field, and so like if Helio Castroneves attempts a road course later in the year and there's only 38 entries, then he's going to make it just fine. There's no need for the special exemption, but yeah, I guess it'll be interesting to see, who else Trackhouse brings to Project 91 or if anyone else gets approved for it. But, definitely something that's going to have some people happy and the other side not as happy.
So beyond the Daytona 500, another noteworthy rule change, which I'm personally a big fan of, is NASCAR's alteration of the damaged vehicle policy, which of course has been a very tense subject in recent years, particularly in the playoffs last season at Watkins Glen and again at Kansas, with drivers getting stripped from the ability to race after just one lap in both of those races. Now, there's still some rules regarding that, and cars that have the flat tires have to go to the garage, but now if you go to the garage, your day isn't necessarily over, even though the damaged vehicle clock still exists. So, your thoughts on this rule change from the sport?
So I like you. I also welcome the changes. It would have been nice to have this squared away last season before the playoffs started, but I mean, better late than never. Because I was at the Kansas race when Josh Berry was out on lap one with four flat tires, and I'm glad that we won't have that happen again. But it's it's kind of what's kind of interesting is it's almost like there's still a damaged vehicle policy, but it's almost like we're back to the pre 2017 rules where teams could go behind the garage and just repair as much as they want anyway. So I kind of like it because I think there's some times where the cars are just so damaged that they're just the teams are just like haphazardly putting everything together to try and beat the clock, and they might drop more debris and so on. But at the same time, you're still trying to beat the clock and not go to the garage. So there might be there might be some issues with that, but I think what this will allow is that, like, for example, earlier in this year we saw Kyle Larson wreck at Iowa, we saw Chase Elliott wreck at Las Vegas. They both met minimum speed and cleared the DVP clock, but a couple laps later they went back into the garage to make more repairs. I think this will help in those circumstances because the cars that are just way too damaged to run, even if they do manage to repair stuff in 7 minutes, I think it'd be better just for them to go to the garage and just get everything fixed there if they're ultimately going to go to the garage anyway. But yeah, I'm just glad that of course we'll have to see how this gets put in practice, how this is officiated by NASCAR, and if it goes off without a hitch. But it's definitely a welcome change to what we had last year, where it kind of varied by race. With Blaney being out at Watkins Glen, Berry being out at Kansas, instead, and compared to how we had just everyone get a toe back in Talladega after that huge wreck.
Yeah, and I always say this, auto racing is a team sport. At times you do want to allow it to get into the mechanics' hands and see what they can do with these cars to piece things together. I mean, I always remember when I first used to watch the sport when you'd see like a Bristol wreck and then the infamous Dale Jr. car where they had to tape an 88 back onto the car. I like those elements of racing sometimes. But last rule change I wanted to get your thoughts on. The playoffs didn't really alter all that much despite the controversy late in the year, which to me was to be expected. I didn't think there would be wholesale changes, but the new rule that came out regarding waivers, clearly NASCAR saying that the situation with Kyle Larson, they don't want to keep replicating. And essentially, the new rule is unless you get a medical exemption or other emergency circumstances, if you're not there for a race, even if you get that waiver, you're not getting those playoff points back when the postseason starts. So, your reaction to this change?
I love this change. I think one of the biggest conundrums of this format, the way it is a driver getting suspended and getting that waiver and still having all their playoff points. It's like, I mean, yes, you're missing a race, but it almost felt like a slap on the wrist because you got the waiver anyway. Um, I love this because you still have the waivers for kind of more legitimate reasons like illness, injury, and so on, and you're still rewarded with all your playoff points. But if you do, I guess, things that are more frowned upon, like missing an entire race to run another race or doing something that gets you suspended, you no longer have that safety net of all the playoff points that you've acquired before. So I am very happy to see this rule change in place.
Yeah, and I do feel like it's a good way to kind of separate things that are in your control and things that are out of your control in terms of the playoff perspective. But those are some of the key rule changes heading into the 2025 season. That's just a couple of weeks away. Content manager for Frontstretch, Steven Stumpf, thanks for joining us here on Motorsports Today.